The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Rosewood Palace, but inside the royal chambers, darkness seemed to have settled permanently. Prince Alexander stood by the tall windows, his usually strong shoulders now bent under an invisible weight that had been growing heavier with each passing day. The doctors had been clear, there was nothing more they could do. The illness that had been quietly stealing his beloved wife Princess Isabella's strength was now in its final stages. Isabella lay in their four-poster bed, her once vibrant auburn hair now thin and pale against the silk pillows. Her emerald eyes, which had captivated Alexander from the moment they first met at a charity gala 15 years ago, still held that familiar sparkle, though it flickered now like a candle in the wind. She had always been the heart of the kingdom, beloved by the people for her genuine warmth and tireless work with children's charities. Now, as autumn painted the palace gardens in shades of gold and crimson, it seemed as though the season was mirroring the twilight of her life. The palace staff moved through the halls with hushed voices and careful steps. Mrs. Margaret Hayes, the head housekeeper who had served the royal family for 30 years, found herself wiping away tears more often than she cared to admit. She had watched Princess Isabella transform from a nervous young bride into a confident queen-to-be, and seeing her now broke something deep inside the older woman's heart. The kitchen staff prepared Isabella's favorite meals, though she could barely manage more than a few spoonfuls. Even Chef Laurent, known for his stern demeanor, had been seen dabbing his eyes with his apron more than once. The children, Prince Oliver, now 12, and Princess Emma, 10, had been told the truth in gentle terms that their young minds could understand. Oliver, who had inherited his father's serious nature, tried to be brave for his little sister, but Emma's constant questions about when Mama would feel better again pierced through everyone's carefully maintained composure. The palace tutors found it increasingly difficult to keep the children focused on their lessons when their thoughts were constantly with their mother. Dr. William Thornfield, the royal physician, had exhausted every possible treatment. The rare blood disorder that had been diagnosed 6 months earlier had proven resistant to all modern medicine's attempts to halt its progression. He had consulted with specialists from around the world, but the unanimous verdict remained unchanged. Isabella's body was slowly shutting down, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The weight of this knowledge sat heavily on his shoulders as he made his daily visits to the palace, watching a woman he had come to respect and admire slowly slip away. Alexander found himself reliving memories at the strangest moments. Yesterday, while walking through the rose garden that Isabella had designed, he remembered their wedding day 15 years ago. She had been radiant in her grandmother's lace wedding gown, and when she spoke her vows, her voice had been strong and clear, promising to love him through sickness and health. Now those words felt like a prophecy coming true in the cruelest way possible. He had always imagined they would grow old together, watching their children become adults, perhaps even welcoming grandchildren. The future they had planned seemed to be dissolving before his eyes. The palace's correspondence department had been overwhelmed with letters and flowers from citizens around the world. People who had never met Isabella personally felt compelled to send their prayers and well wishes. Her work with disadvantaged children had touched countless lives, and now those same people wanted to offer comfort in return. The staff had to designate an entire room just to store the thousands of bouquets and cards that arrived daily. Reading some of the letters, particularly those from children whose lives Isabella had personally touched, brought both comfort and fresh waves of grief. Isabella's parents, the Duke and Duchess of Willowbrook, had moved into the palace to be closer to their daughter. The Duchess, Lady Catherine, spent hours by Isabella's bedside, sometimes talking about childhood memories, other times sitting in comfortable silence. The Duke, Lord James, found solace in organizing Isabella's charity work to ensure it would continue in her memory. They had raised their daughter to be strong and gracious, never imagining they would have to watch her face such a battle with such dignity. The royal doctor had suggested that Isabella might be more comfortable if they discussed her final wishes. It was a conversation that no one wanted to have, but Isabella herself brought it up one evening as Alexander sat reading to her from her favorite poetry collection. Her voice was weak, but determined as she spoke about wanting to be remembered for the work she had done, not the illness that was taking her away. She worried most about the children, wanting to make sure they would remember her love even as they grew up without her guidance. The palace chaplain, Father Benedict, had become a regular presence in the royal chambers. Isabella found comfort in their conversations about faith and meaning, though she admitted that understanding why this was happening to her family remained beyond her grasp. Alexander, who had never been particularly religious, found himself praying more than he ever had before, though he wasn't sure if he was asking for a miracle or simply for strength to face what was coming. As October deepened and the first frost appeared on the palace windows, everyone could sense that time was running short. Isabella's good days were becoming fewer, and even on those days, she tired more easily than before. The sound of her coughing echoed through the corridors, and the palace physician was now visiting twice daily instead of once. Alexander rarely left her side, conducting only the most essential royal duties and delegating everything else to his advisors. The approaching end felt like a storm on the horizon, visible, inevitable, but somehow still surreal. The palace that had once rung with laughter and the sounds of children playing now seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something that everyone dreaded but no one could prevent. In the quiet moments between Isabella's periods of sleep, Alexander held her hand and tried to memorize every detail of her face, knowing that soon these precious moments would become memories that would have to last him the rest of his life. The weight of grief had settled over Rosewood Palace like a heavy blanket, muffling the usual sounds of daily life, and leaving everyone who lived and worked there moving through their days with hearts that felt too full of sorrow to function normally. Yet through it all, Isabella's grace and courage continued to inspire those around her, even as she faced the greatest challenge of her life with the same dignity that had always defined her character. The morning of October 28th dawned gray and drizzling, as if the sky itself was weeping for what was to come. Inside the palace walls, Princess Isabella had spent a restless night, her breathing becoming more labored despite the oxygen support that had been quietly installed the week before. Dr. Thornfield arrived earlier than usual, his expression grave as he completed his examination. When he stepped out of the royal chamber to speak with Prince Alexander, the look in his eyes said everything that words couldn't express. Alexander felt his world tilt on its axis as the doctor explained that Isabella's condition had deteriorated significantly overnight. The end was no longer a distant possibility, but an approaching reality that might come within days, perhaps even hours. The prince steadied himself against the ornate wallpaper of the corridor, feeling as though the breath had been knocked from his lungs. He had known this moment would come, but hearing it spoken aloud made it devastatingly real in a way that months of preparation could not soften. Isabella, despite her weakening state, insisted on seeing their children. Oliver and Emma were brought to her bedside, their young faces solemn as they tried to understand the gravity of what their mother was telling them. Isabella's voice was barely above a whisper, but her words carried the weight of a lifetime of love as she spoke to each child individually. To Oliver, she emphasized his role as the future king and the importance of kindness and leadership. To Emma, she spoke of staying curious about the world and using her intelligence to help others. Both children listened with tears streaming down their faces, too young to fully comprehend that these might be their last private moments with their mother. The palace staff had been quietly informed of the situation, and a hush fell over the massive building as everyone went about their duties with heavy hearts. Mrs. Hayes found herself checking on the children more frequently, offering extra hugs, and making sure their favorite meals were prepared even though appetites were sparse. The groundskeepers continued tending Isabella's beloved rose garden with extra care, as if maintaining its beauty could somehow hold back the inevitable. Even the palace cats seemed to sense the somber mood, moving more quietly through their familiar territories. As word spread through the kingdom's inner circles, government officials and foreign dignitaries began making arrangements to attend what everyone understood would soon be a state funeral. The palace's event coordinators found themselves in the surreal position of planning a farewell for a woman who was still alive, but fading fast. Isabella herself had insisted on reviewing these plans during her clearer moments, wanting to ensure that the ceremony would focus on celebration of life rather than mourning. She requested that children from the charities she supported be invited to participate, saying that their presence would bring her more peace than any royal protocol could provide. Alexander's siblings, Prince Michael and Princess Victoria, arrived from their respective homes abroad. Michael, usually the joker of the family, found himself unusually subdued as he sat with his sister-in-law and tried to find words that wouldn't crack under the weight of emotion. Victoria, who had always shared a special bond with Isabella over their mutual love of art, brought a collection of photographs spanning their 15 years of friendship. They spent an afternoon looking through the images together, Isabella's weak laughter punctuating stories of royal tours, family vacations, and quiet moments that had never been photographed but lived vividly in their memories. The children of the kingdom had begun gathering outside the palace gates, leaving flowers, drawings, and handwritten letters. Teachers reported that students across the country were creating artwork and writing poems for Princess Isabella, their young hearts somehow understanding that someone very special was fighting a battle she might not win. The palace guards, usually stern in their duties, found themselves accepting these offerings with gentleness that would have made Isabella proud. Isabella's strength continued to ebb like a slowly retreating tide. She slept for longer periods now, and when she was awake, her mind sometimes wandered to memories from years past. She would speak about her wedding day as if it had happened yesterday, or suddenly ask about events from her childhood. Alexander learned to follow these conversational threads wherever they led, understanding that her mind was perhaps protecting itself by retreating to happier times. Sometimes she would look at him with perfect clarity and apologize for leaving him, breaking his heart anew each time. The palace medical team had transitioned from treating the illness to ensuring Isabella's comfort. Pain management became the primary concern as they worked to keep her as peaceful as possible during her final days. Alexander refused to leave her side except when absolutely necessary, conducting phone meetings from a chair beside her bed and signing documents with one hand while holding hers with the other. His advisors handled everything they could, understanding that their prince's place was exactly where he was. Father Benedict spent increasing amounts of time with the family, not just providing spiritual comfort, but serving as a buffer between them and the growing media attention outside the palace walls. News vans had begun lining the streets as word leaked that the beloved princess was in her final days. The chaplain worked with palace security to ensure that the family's privacy was protected while also acknowledging the public's right to information about someone they loved as deeply as they loved Isabella. On the evening of October 30th, Isabella asked Alexander to help her record messages for their children to receive on future birthdays and milestones. Though it exhausted her greatly, she insisted on creating these final gifts, wanting Oliver and Emma to hear her voice and feel her love during the important moments she wouldn't be there to share. The recordings were made with just Alexander operating a simple video camera, creating intimate messages that would become the family's most precious possessions. The palace kitchen continued preparing Isabella's favorite foods, even though she could now manage only small sips of soup or tea. Chef Laurent personally prepared delicate broths and light desserts, hoping that something might tempt her appetite and provide a few more calories to sustain her failing body. The gesture was more about love than nutrition at this point, but everyone needed to feel they were doing something helpful, no matter how small. As Halloween approached, Emma asked if they could still have their traditional costume party. Isabella, despite her weakness, insisted that the celebration should go on, saying that life and joy should continue even in the darkest times. The party was smaller and quieter than usual, held in Isabella's chamber so she could participate from her bed. Seeing her children laugh and play, even briefly, brought the first genuine smile to Isabella's face in days. The weight of anticipatory grief hung over everyone in the palace like a fog that wouldn't lift. Conversations were conducted in hushed tones, laughter felt inappropriate, and every moment seemed pregnant with the possibility of being the last of something precious. Yet through it all, Isabella's presence continued to be a source of grace and strength for those around her, teaching them about courage and dignity even as her body prepared to let go of the life she had lived so fully and loved so deeply. November 1st arrived with an unseasonable warmth that seemed to mock the cold reality settling over Rosewood Palace. Princess Isabella had awakened that morning with unusual clarity, as if her spirit was gathering its remaining strength for something important. Dr. Thornfield recognized this phenomenon from his years of medical practice. Sometimes patients experienced a final surge of awareness before their bodies finally surrendered to their illness. He prepared Alexander gently for what this might mean, explaining that they should treasure this unexpected gift of lucidity while understanding it was likely temporary. Isabella used this precious clarity to have meaningful conversations with each person who mattered to her. She spoke with Mrs. Hayes about the importance of keeping family traditions alive for Oliver and Emma, asking the housekeeper to help maintain the small rituals that made their house feel like a home rather than just a palace. The conversation was interrupted frequently by Isabella's need to rest, but She persisted with determination that reminded everyone why the people of the kingdom loved her so deeply. Alexander found himself caught between hope and despair as he watched Isabella engage more actively than she had in weeks. Part of him wondered if perhaps the doctors had been wrong, if maybe this was the beginning of an unexpected recovery. But the rational part of his mind, the part trained in royal duty to face difficult truths, understood that this was more likely a final gift, one last opportunity to say the things that needed to be said and feel the connections that made life meaningful. The children responded to their mother's renewed energy with joy that was both heartbreaking and beautiful to witness. Oliver, who had been carrying himself with forced maturity for weeks, allowed himself to be 12 years old again as he told Isabella about his latest chess strategies and his hopes for the upcoming polo season. Emma curled up beside her mother and chattered about everything and nothing, her favorite books, her new friendship with the daughter of a palace gardener, her dreams of traveling to see the northern lights someday. Isabella listened to her children with an intensity that seemed to burn through her physical weakness. She memorized their voices, their expressions, the way Oliver's eyes lit up when he talked about horses, and how Emma's hands moved expressively when she was excited about something. These details would have to last her whatever came next, and she gathered them like treasures to carry forward into the unknown. The palace staff noticed Isabella's improved condition and felt their own complicated mix of hope and realistic concern. Chef Laurent prepared a more elaborate lunch than Isabella had been able to manage in weeks, and, to everyone's surprise, she managed several spoonfuls of his special butternut squash soup and even commented on the perfect blend of spices. The kitchen staff celebrated this small victory while trying not to read too much meaning into it. Isabella asked to be helped to her sitting room, where large windows overlooked the gardens she had designed and nurtured throughout their marriage. Alexander supported her carefully as they made the short journey from the bedroom, her steps unsteady but determined. Once settled in her favorite chair with blankets tucked around her, she gazed out at the landscape that held so many memories. The autumn flowers were beginning to fade, but the evergreen trees stood strong and constant, just as she hoped her love would remain for her family long after she was gone. During the afternoon, Isabella surprised everyone by asking for her laptop so she could review the foundation work that would continue in her name. Alexander worried that this might be too taxing for her, but she insisted that ensuring the charity's future direction was important to her peace of mind. She spent an hour reviewing budgets and program descriptions, making notes about projects she wanted to see prioritized, and people she trusted to carry on the mission that had become so central to her identity as princess. The conversations throughout the day had a quality of completion to them, as if Isabella was deliberately addressing every important relationship and responsibility before something final occurred. She called her parents, speaking with them for nearly 30 minutes about memories from her childhood and expressing gratitude for the values they had instilled in her. She spoke with her closest friends, some of whom had flown in from other countries to be near during this difficult time. As evening approached, Isabella asked Alexander to read to her from the poetry collection that had become their nightly ritual. Her choice surprised him. Instead of the romantic verses she usually preferred, she selected poems about courage, legacy, and the continuity of love beyond physical presence. Her selections seemed carefully chosen, as if she was trying to communicate something beyond what direct conversation could express. The medical team monitored Isabella closely throughout this extraordinary day, adjusting her care to support her increased activity while watching for signs that her body might be overextending itself. Dr. Thornfield consulted with his colleagues about whether they should encourage more rest, but ultimately decided that denying Isabella this final period of connection would be more harmful than helpful. They maintained their vigilant care while allowing her to use her energy as she chose. As night fell over the palace, Isabella requested that Oliver and Emma stay in the master bedroom rather than returning to their own rooms. Palace staff quickly arranged comfortable sleeping arrangements for the children, understanding that family togetherness had become the highest priority. The children seemed to sense the specialness of this time, asking fewer questions than usual and simply accepting the changes to their normal routine. Alexander lay awake most of that night, watching Isabella sleep and trying to process the gift of the day they had shared. Her breathing was still labored, her physical condition unchanged despite her mental clarity, but somehow the conversations and connections had filled something in his heart that had been emptying for months. He found himself feeling grateful rather than just sad, blessed to have received this unexpected opportunity for meaningful farewell. The palace settled into its nighttime quiet, but there was a different quality to the stillness than there had been in recent weeks. Instead of the heavy silence of waiting and dread, there was something more peaceful, as if important business had been completed and everyone could rest more easily. Outside, the autumn wind whispered through the bare tree branches, carrying with it the promise of winter and the eternal cycle of seasons that would continue long after this particular chapter of the royal family's story had ended. Isabella's burst of clarity and connection had reminded everyone in the palace that love transcends physical limitations and that the bonds between people can shine brightest when circumstances seem darkest. The day had been both a gift and a goodbye, offering comfort and closure while making the approaching loss feel simultaneously more bearable and more profound than anyone had imagined possible. The morning of November 2nd brought with it a profound stillness that seemed to settle into the very stones of Rosewood Palace. Princess Isabella had slipped into a deeper state of unconsciousness during the early hours, her body finally acknowledging what her spirit had been fighting for months. Dr. Thornfield arrived before dawn and confirmed what Alexander already knew in his heart. They were now measuring time in hours rather than days. The clarity and energy of the previous day had been Isabella's final gift of presence, and now her body was beginning the process of letting go. Alexander gathered Oliver and Emma before they could become frightened by the change in their mother's condition. He explained, with words carefully chosen for their young understanding, that Mama was very tired now and was sleeping more deeply than usual. Her body was getting ready to stop working, and while this was very sad, it was also natural and peaceful. Emma asked if it would hurt, and Alexander was able to honestly reassure her that the doctors were making sure Mama felt no pain. Oliver, trying to be brave, asked if he should pray for a miracle, and Alexander told him that prayers of love and gratitude were always good, whatever form they took. The children were allowed to spend time with Isabella throughout the morning, talking to her softly, even though she couldn't respond. Oliver read aloud from his favorite adventure books, his voice occasionally cracking with emotion, but continuing with the determination his mother had always admired in him. Emma sang lullabies in her sweet, clear voice, the same songs Isabella had sung to her since birth. The medical staff confirmed that hearing was often the last sense to fade, so the children's voices might very well be bringing comfort even if Isabella couldn't show her awareness. Isabella's parents maintained their vigil with quiet dignity, taking turns sitting beside their daughter and sharing memories in gentle whispers. The Duchess spoke about Isabella's childhood love of horses and how proud she had been when her daughter learned to jump her first fence. The Duke reminisced about teaching Isabella to dance before her debut, how seriously she had taken the lessons, determined to represent her family with grace. These stories helped fill the silence and reminded everyone in the room that Isabella had always been remarkable, long before she became a princess. The palace staff continued their duties with hearts heavy but hands steady. Mrs. Hayes ensured that Isabella's room remained filled with fresh flowers from the garden, arranging them quietly so their beauty would surround the princess even in her unconscious state. The groundskeeping staff worked with extra devotion on the rose garden, knowing that soon it would serve as a living memorial to the woman who had designed it with such love and care. Dr. Thornfield and his team monitored Isabella's vital signs constantly, adjusting her medication to ensure her comfort while allowing her natural process to proceed without interference. They had moved beyond any attempt at treatment to focus entirely on dignity and peace. The medical equipment was kept as unobtrusive as possible, understanding that this was no longer a hospital room, but a place where a family was saying goodbye to someone they cherished beyond measure. Alexander found himself entering a strange state of suspended time where minutes felt like hours and hours passed like moments. He held Isabella's hand constantly, talking to her about their shared memories and making promises about how he would care for their children. He told her about the morning sunlight streaming through her favorite window and described the autumn colors in the garden, wanting her to experience these beautiful things even if she couldn't see them herself. Father Benedict arrived to provide spiritual comfort, offering prayers and readings that had brought solace to generations of royal families facing loss. He spoke about the continuation of love beyond physical existence and the peace that comes with a life well lived. His presence brought calm to everyone in the room, his steady faith offering an anchor in the storm of grief that was beginning to break over the family. The children's tutors suspended all lessons for the day, understanding that no education could be more important than allowing Oliver and Emma to be present for their mother's final hours. Instead, the tutors quietly helped with practical matters, ensuring the children ate small meals and stayed hydrated even though no one felt much like eating. They also served as gentle guardians, watching for signs that the children might need breaks from the intensity of the situation. As afternoon faded into evening, Isabella's breathing became more irregular, with longer pauses that made everyone in the room hold their own breath until the next gentle rise and fall of her chest. Dr. Thornfield explained quietly that this pattern was normal and natural, part of the body's way of gradually releasing its hold on life. He assured Alexander that Isabella remained peaceful and without distress, despite how difficult it was for those who loved her to witness these changes. The palace communication staff had prepared statements for release to the media and the public, understanding that the entire kingdom was waiting for news. However, these announcements would wait until after the family had time to process their private grief. For now, the focus remained entirely on creating a peaceful environment for Isabella and ensuring that her final hours were filled with love rather than the pressures of public attention. Alexander made the difficult decision to allow Oliver and Emma to stay through the evening rather than sending them to bed at their usual time. Both children had expressed a desire to remain close to their mother, and the family chaplain supported this choice, explaining that being present for death, while sad, could also be a meaningful way to understand the completeness of life's cycle. The children curled up in chairs near Isabella's bed, sometimes dozing but mostly staying quietly alert. As the palace clock struck 10 in the evening, Isabella's breathing became even more gentle and spaced apart. The family gathered closer, each person finding a way to maintain physical contact. Alexander holding her right hand, Oliver touching her arm, Emma resting her small hand on her mother's shoulder, while Isabella's parents stood at the foot of the bed. In the soft lamplight of the room, surrounded by flowers and family, Princess Isabella appeared peaceful beyond words. The moment approached with a quiet inevitability that felt both sudden and eternal. Love filled the room so completely that grief seemed temporarily suspended, replaced by profound gratitude for having been part of Isabella's remarkable life. The palace that had been holding its breath for weeks now seemed to exhale slowly, preparing to release someone who had brought immeasurable grace and joy to all who knew her. At 11:47 on the evening of November 2nd, Princess Isabella drew her final breath with the same grace that had characterized every moment of her life. The transition was so gentle that for several seconds, no one in the room was certain it had happened. Alexander continued holding her hand, feeling the warmth that would gradually fade, but somehow sensing that something essential about Isabella, her love, her spirit, her impact on the world, remained vibrantly present in ways that transcended physical existence. Dr. Thornfield quietly confirmed what the family already understood, and then respectfully withdrew to allow them private time with Isabella before the necessary protocols would begin. Oliver and Emma approached their mother's bedside with a mixture of curiosity and solemnity that showed their young minds trying to process something they had never encountered before. Emma reached out to touch Isabella's face, commenting softly that Mama looked peaceful, like she was having nice dreams. Alexander felt as though he was moving through water as the reality of Isabella's death settled into his consciousness. The woman who had been his partner in everything for 15 years, who had shared his dreams and helped him become the man and leader he was meant to be, was gone. Yet somehow, in that initial hour after her passing, what he felt most strongly was not devastation, but profound gratitude. They had been blessed with time to say goodbye, to express their love fully, and to prepare as much as anyone can prepare for such a loss. The palace staff, who had been waiting anxiously throughout the evening, were informed of Isabella's passing with gentle words that acknowledged their grief, as well as the family's. Mrs. Hayes wept openly as she heard the news, remembering the nervous young bride who had become like a daughter to her over the years. The kitchen staff gathered in their domain, sharing stories about Isabella's kindness and her habit of personally thanking everyone who had contributed to special events. Even the security team, trained to remain professionally distant, found themselves struggling with the loss of someone who had always treated them as valued individuals rather than mere employees. Within hours, the official announcement was released to a kingdom that had been holding vigil for weeks. The statement, carefully crafted to honor Isabella's life rather than simply announce her death, spoke of her dedication to charitable causes, her devotion to family, and her grace under the most difficult circumstances. Citizens who had never met the princess personally found themselves weeping as they received the news, feeling as though they had lost someone from their own family. The planning that had been quietly underway for weeks now moved into full implementation. Isabella's funeral would be a state occasion befitting her position, but it would also reflect her personal wishes for a celebration of life rather than a somber farewell. The cathedral where she and Alexander had been married would host the service, with representatives from the children's charities she had supported serving as honorary pallbearers alongside government officials and foreign dignitaries. In the days following Isabella's death, the palace became a different kind of gathering place. The formal receiving rooms were opened to allow government officials and foreign representatives to pay their respects, while the family's private quarters became a cocoon where Oliver, Emma, and Alexander could process their grief away from public scrutiny. The children showed remarkable resilience, asking questions about what would happen next, and expressing concern for their father's well-being with maturity that would have made Isabella proud. Alexander found himself moving through the funeral preparations with mechanical precision, making decisions about flowers, music, and guest lists while feeling emotionally numb. His body performed the necessary functions while his heart seemed to have gone into protective hibernation. Friends and family recognized this as a normal response to profound loss and surrounded him with practical support while respecting his need to process grief in his own way and time. The outpouring of public affection for Isabella exceeded everyone's expectations. Flowers covered the palace gates in layers several feet deep, and condolence books filled faster than palace staff could provide new ones. Children from around the world sent drawings and letters, many expressing hope that Princess Isabella was now healthy and happy in heaven, playing with angel children who needed her special kindness. These innocent expressions of love provided comfort to the royal family during their darkest hours. Isabella's charitable foundation received donations totaling millions within the first week after her death, as people sought meaningful ways to honor her memory. The foundation's board worked quickly to establish the protocols Isabella had outlined for continuing her work, ensuring that her vision for helping disadvantaged children would extend far beyond her lifetime. Alexander found some solace in knowing that Isabella's impact on the world would continue growing even after she was gone. The funeral service, held on a crisp November morning with autumn sunlight streaming through the cathedral's stained glass windows, brought together a remarkable gathering of people whose lives Isabella had touched. Heads of state sat beside social workers from local charities, and royal protocol was gently adjusted to accommodate the children Isabella had specifically requested to participate. Oliver and Emma read brief passages that Isabella had selected, their young voices carrying clearly through the vast space with a courage that inspired everyone present. Alexander's eulogy for his wife focused on her gift for seeing the best in people and her belief that small acts of kindness could change the world. He spoke about her laughter, her determination to make their marriage a true partnership, and her joy in motherhood. His voice broke only once, when he described how proud he was to have been loved by someone so remarkable, and how blessed their children were to carry forward her values and spirit. Following the funeral, the palace entered a new chapter of learning to function without Isabella's presence. The immediate crisis of her illness was over, but the longer journey of rebuilding life around her absence was just beginning. Alexander threw himself into his royal duties with increased dedication, finding purpose in work that Isabella had always encouraged him to approach with compassion and wisdom. Oliver and Emma returned to their studies, but with additional support from counselors who specialized in helping children process significant loss. The rose garden that Isabella had designed became an unofficial memorial where staff and family members often went to feel close to her memory. Plans were developed to expand it into a larger memorial garden where the public could visit and reflect. Alexander often walked there in the evenings, finding that the combination of beauty and memories helped him feel connected to Isabella in ways that brought comfort rather than additional pain. 6 months after Isabella's death, Alexander began slowly emerging from the acute phase of grief. The sharp edges of loss had softened into a different kind of sadness, one that coexisted with gratitude and even moments of happiness. Oliver and Emma showed remarkable adaptation, honoring their mother's memory while building new traditions that reflected their changed family structure. The palace staff had learned to navigate their duties with Isabella's values still guiding their service, ensuring that her influence on the royal household would continue for generations to come. The kingdom's memory of Princess Isabella evolved into something deeper than royal protocol typically achieves. She was remembered not just as a princess who had died tragically young, but as a person who had demonstrated that grace, kindness, and genuine care for others could transform both individual lives and entire communities. Her legacy lived on in the children she had helped, the charitable work that continued in her name, and the family she had loved so completely that their bond transcended even death itself. In the end, the palace had indeed gone silent when Isabella died, but it was the silence of respect and love rather than emptiness. Her presence continued to influence every decision, every tradition, and every act of service that took place within those walls, proving that some impacts on the world are too powerful to be limited by the boundaries of a single lifetime.